Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm going to be talking about episode 1 of season 1 of the show Alphas. This episode was suggested to me by Dark Emergence, so I'm going to be reviewing. I've never seen Alphas before this. I've only vaguely heard of it. So I'm going to just be reviewing this one episode, and I'm going to be doing a lot of spoilers here. So if you're not into spoilers, now is going to be the time to back out. Now that said, this is the only episode of the series that I have ever seen. So I'm only going to be able to remark on what I have seen in this particular episode. Again, this is the only episode of the show that I have ever seen. So this review is entirely going to be just focused on what I see in this one episode. So let's get into it. This is a show from the Sci-Fi Channel, who recently have really been having a pretty good stroke of luck with their original programming. This show, from what I read online, apparently was reasonably well received, and they've also been getting some pretty decent reviews for the U.S. version of Being Human. And honestly, I can say that overall, I was pretty impressed with this show. It's not, phenomenal, blow me out of the water, hooked from episode 1, but it certainly does seem to be an interesting and pretty well written, well acted show. So overall, I did like it. Now let's dive into the specifics. The basic story with Alphas is one, that it's sort of set in the sci-fi with an SY as in the Sci-Fi Channel. Yeah, that's what I think about that. But it's also set in the same universe as the shows Warehouse 13 and Eureka. I've never watched Warehouse 13, although I've heard it's quite good. One of my friends just absolutely loves to rave about it whenever she starts talking about the show. So there's that, and I have seen. I think it is the majority of the first season of Eureka, but apart from being set in the same universe, these shows don't really have a huge tie together. So, I can kind of go into this and not really be worried about that particular aspect. But going into it, in the Alphas world, there are people who do have what are essentially superhuman powers. However, they are more or less just natural extensions of what people can do. More or less. There do seem to be exceptions. For example, the one person that we see in this episode, the bad guy of this episode, a fellow who just goes by the code name of the Ghost, has the ability to more or less brainwash people just by touching them. Now, you could sort of make the case that people can indeed brainwash people into doing stuff. There have been more than a few documented cases of people just flat out being able to talk other people into doing all kinds of crazy things. But, that's a little. I'd have to know more about this world of this universe to really talk too much about that. For the most part, the powers that at least I have seen here in the first episode, and again, there does seem to be a minor, some exception to this, seem to be just enhanced versions of what people can normally do. Looking at the people that we have with the superpowers, who are quote unquote good guys, they work for the government, some very ambiguous secret agency part of the government tied to the Department of Defense. We have Nina, who essentially she has mind control. She can just kind of use her voice to get people to do pretty much anything she wants, although there do seem to be exceptions to this. For example, if someone can't hear her clearly, or if their mind is a little off, like in the case of the autistic guy on the team, her powers don't work. Speaking of the autistic guy, this is Gary. He has the ability to see all kinds of information floating around, cell phone conversations, things like cell phone transmissions, all this other stuff, electromagnetic stuff. Again, that's not really an ability that anyone in the real world actually has, but that I'll allow the show that concession, because he is actually, I think, my favorite out of everybody on the team so far. And then we also have Bill. He's a FBI agent who can essentially sort of psychically pump himself up to do extraordinary physical acts. I'm just going to shorthand it as saying that he has superhuman strength. And then we have Rachel, who has the ability to enhance any one of her 5 senses to an absolutely phenomenal superhuman level at the expense of basically more or less turning the others off. Now, it is remarked on in this episode that there is pretty much a downside to everybody using one of these powers. For example, Bill, when he uses his superhuman strength, when he amps himself up, afterward, if it puts a real strain on his body, if he does it too much, it looks like he can risk genuinely hurting himself in doing so. Rachel, I did do some reading about this. Apparently, she can be overloaded by her senses if she's not really careful with this. And again, it is even flat out stated that I already said that. It is stated that there are drawbacks for this sort of thing. And of course, Nina completely and not coincidentally neglects to mention this when she starts talking with Cameron, who is the new guy on the team due to the events of this episode. And he has the essentially basically just being a really hyper good athlete. So in a way, he's very similar to Bill that way, but he can be an absolutely phenomenal shot. He could focus himself, and apparently this all gives him the ability to also do parkour. But yeah, some of the stuff it's also partially explained by the fact that the guy was a Marine, and apparently a very good one. So him being extremely athletic and a good shot are, of course, perfectly in keeping with somebody who was a Marine. So anyway, let's get into the story. We'll talk about some of the other characters from the show a little bit later on. The short version of this is our main bad guy, the Ghost, uses his powers to force Cameron, I almost called him Bill, we'll get to Bill in a minute, to assassinate a federal prisoner who seems to have information on an organization of evil superhuman bad guys who call themselves Red Flag. Well, okay, I do have to admit that's sort of a rather ridiculous name for a group of bad guys, but when you look at the real world out there, there are numerous bad guy organizations like Shining Path and was it Black September or November 17th or something like that. Well, whatever. There are numerous real world organizations who have had equally ridiculous names. So I can let them slide on that. So what Bill does is, I'm sorry, I'll get to Bill in a minute, I promise you, is the Ghost arranges for Cameron to perform this absolutely impossible shot of killing a guy using a sniper rifle to kill a guy inside of a building in front of 2 government agents. Now, here is where we hit my first major problem with this episode. Is even though the government agents see this guy get shot right in front of them, they're completely mystified as to where the shot could have come from. Now, this is not entirely unjustifiable. They're in a room with no windows. There's one door. They're both standing beside this. So the only other entrance in or out of this room is the vent. And this is, of course, where the bullet comes from. Cameron, because of his superhuman ability, is able to fire the bullet, have it go down into the vent, ricochet, and hit the prisoner guy who they were interrogating in the head. But it does not seem to occur to trained government agents to check the freaking vent. Now, granted, there's no possible way there could have been a guy hiding in the vent to shoot the prisoner, so I can see why they wouldn't think of that. But again, they don't even bother to look at it. Now look, folks, I'm not going to try and play armchair CSI too much here, but I do enjoy watching those forensic science shows a lot. And one thing that I have learned is that when they do study crime scenes and angular and things like that, basically one of the things they tend to do, and you've seen this on the real CSI TV show, that's something they also do in real life, is they will get one of what is basically a jumped up laser level, put it at where the victim was, and from that use a little bit of good old triangulation, a little bit of geometry, and figure out where the person who fired the bullet was shooting. Well, I'm sorry, was when they pulled the trigger. Now you would think that a little bit of that, you would think that a freaking laser level would be able to tell them that they should at the very least examine the vent. But no, our government agent guy, Don, needs to call in Bill Rosen and his team of superhuman investigator people to figure out that much. Now, Bill is the leader of this team, and he is a very interesting guy. He's not really a government agent. He is more or less a psychologist. And that does seem to be an interesting choice of somebody to lead a group of people like this. But in a way, as you watch this episode, it actually becomes perfectly clear as to why he's the perfect choice. And the reason why is because all these people on the team have some really serious psychological problems. Now, we don't really get a huge amount of time to get into this, but Nina, for example, has apparently done something in the past that it's strongly implied that she really, really hurt somebody, may have even killed them. And Bill is sort of her, I guess, confidant on this, the person who has been helping her deal with this. Rachel has issues with being assertive. She can't really stand up for herself. Bill, he has some serious boundary issues. He just doesn't seem to think about how his actions affect other people. He's very rude and inconsiderate at times, and at other times is just flat out horribly reckless. But we'll talk some more about Bill and being reckless later on. And of course, Gary has a tendency to sort of want to get on, a tendency to get kind of passive aggressive, I guess you could say. Now, a part of what is going on with Gary can of course be excused by the fact that he's autistic. Now, granted, he's a high functioning autistic, but still, he is autistic. So again, and of course we have Cameron, who, after the events of this episode of basically being used as a tool to murder a man, has certainly some issues left over from that, as well as issues left over from just his life before that. Now, those are only lightly touched upon, but one of them that is the strongest and is made quite clear is that he has some issues about being separated due to family politics from his son. So again, I do like this. This does seem it's a step away from the traditional formula that you see with these things, where the leader of things like this is always some, basically some suit. For a classic example of this would be the character like Aaron Hotchner on Criminal Minds. Now, please do not take this as me dissing Criminal Minds. I love Criminal Minds. It is one of my favorite TV shows that's currently on the air these days. I'm just saying that shows like this, you generally tend to have your standard textbook issue federal agent guy who's in charge of all these things. And Bill Rosen is completely the opposite from that. In fact, he is very adversarial a lot of the time with Don, the standard issue government agent guy who's playing around with these sort of things. And he has good reason to be, as Don, since he is not actually an FBI agent, as best I understand it, or I could be wrong on this. The Alpha guys apparently work for the Department of Defense. I'm not 100% sure if Bill is with the FBI or not. Again, I'm just going by what I saw in the episode here. I'm not sure if that was made 100% clear, and if it was, please forgive me on that one. But Don very much has the idea, is a big believer in the idea of, you know what you need to know, blah, 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 blah. It's the same obstructive stuff that we see in 100 movies and TV shows. But the thing that's nice about between him and Bill is that Bill does not stand for this. He is not afraid to stand up to Don, and is proven quite adept at prying information that he needs out of Don. And of course the question arises, like, well, Don, why don't you just be a little bit more upfront with these people, and you would have a much greater level of success. But again, this is only the one episode, so I think it would be a little bit unfair for me to completely judge Dawn just based on that. There's probably more going on that I just don't quite understand, so I'm just going to leave it at that in that regard. One thing that was mentioned that I do have to praise this show for quite a bit is the interpersonal relationships between the characters. As I mentioned, that everybody here has their own character flaws, their own issues, their own psychological problems, and it is really great to see those, as well as them just sort of bouncing off each other. The way they talk to each other, the way they get on each other's nerves, the way they show moments of friendship, it all feels very real. It all feels very authentic. It feels, honestly, the way things are in a genuine workplace. Thinking back on the places that I've worked, there have been people that I've liked, there's been people that I've disliked, there have been petty little gripes and things that have arisen between me and other people. And again, Alphas really does do a phenomenal job of showing this. Like, just for example, the conference room scene where everybody sits down to talk about, to get briefed and talk about the murder of the prisoner. During all this, not only does the connection between the laptop and the TV go down, but people are talking over each other, having more than one conversation all at the same time and all that. Just like things tend to happen in real meetings. And this is a complete 180 from, just to use it as an example, Star Trek The Next Generation, where everybody goes into the ready room, they all sit down, nobody grabs a coffee or a donut or anything, and everybody just waits for everyone else to have their turn talking before they raise their point. And I don't mean that as a diss on Star Trek The Next Generation. I love Next Gen. It's what got me into Star Trek. But that's just really not how people act. So yeah, I have to give the show a lot of credit for being very authentic in that. I thought that was wonderfully well done. One other thing that kind of left me scratching my head this episode was them talking about how, and by them I mean the ghost and his henchmen, to talk about who. Let me try and speak clearly. The ghost sends his henchmen off to get pictures of the people who are investigating Red Flag, and the henchman basically tells him, "Okay, I was able to get these pictures, but that was all I was able to get on these people. Their identities have been completely scrubbed." Now, okay, I understand that these guys are working for basically a division of the Department of Defense. And it makes sense that the government would probably try and keep them under wraps. But here's the thing. They're all also apparently living their lives out there in the open under their real names. I guess Nina is probably the exception to that, given what we learned about her. But let's put that aside for the moment. They're all living their lives under what are apparently their real names. Bill is even married. And yet, apparently, these people have no public information on record. Okay, so if that's the case, how the heck does Bill have a bank account or a cell phone account or anything? It just does not make any sense to me. Now, I guess you could say that, oh, well, they have those things, that the government has just thrown up this absolutely impenetrable firewall so that nobody can access them. Well, okay, then how does anybody know where to send Bill his cell phone bill? You know what? I may just be thinking about this too hard, but I think I would be remiss as a reviewer if I did not bring that up. And you know what? Maybe this is explained in more detail later on. But just going from what I have seen in this episode, I felt the need to bring that up. So let's go and talk about, now since we were talking about his cell phone, let's talk about Bill a little bit more. Now eventually during this episode, the good guys track the ghost to the hotel where he's been hiding out. And Bill, the trained FBI guy, goes up there to deal with him. So, okay, this makes sense. He's the most trained to deal with this. But before Bill does this, one thing he does is that he handcuffs Cameron, who they do know has been mind controlled by this guy before, the ghost did try and mind control again, but Nina was able to snap it out of him. So it does make perfect sense that Bill would secure Cameron in a way so that the ghost could not use him against them. The thing is that Bill does this by handcuffing Cameron's hand to the little handle on the side of a van. First of all, I'm pretty sure that a strong guy, especially someone very athletic like Cameron, if they tried hard enough, probably could get loose from that. And even worse, Bill only secures his one hand. His other hand is perfectly free to, if he does get taken over by the bad guy, grab Rachel, who is sitting right next to him, by the throat if he wants to. Now, folks, I don't think I need to tell you that a trained Marine could probably do a lot of damage to a small-sized, ordinary woman with just one hand if he really wanted to, especially if he was being controlled by an evil, nutcase. So the fact that Bill does that makes Bill seem like a real moron. So yeah. Anyway, Bill goes on up there to track the ghost down and can capture him in the hotel room. But before he can do that, he sees the bellhop go into the hotel room. And Bill takes that as his cue that he almost immediately must go in there because he wants to protect the bellhop. Well, okay. It is noble of him to want to protect the bellhop. On the other hand, he has no reason to believe that the ghost will hurt the bellhop. The ghost, as far as he knows, has no idea that they are onto him and know his location. So really, if Bill just stands there and waits for a couple of minutes, in all likelihood the bellhop will come out, get on the elevator, and be perfectly safe, and he will not have to do anything to alert the ghost to his presence and thus be in a better position to get the drop on him. But no, Bill thinks that the best thing to do is to pump himself up and go charging into this random situation, thus putting the bellhop's life at risk. Incidentally, the bellhop does end up dead, but it's not because of anything Bill did, more or less. But anyway, Bill, in pursuing what he thinks is the ghost escaping from the hotel room, chooses to open fire in a crowded hallway. Literally, he forces two innocent people who are just walking through the hall to duck down and cover their heads. Now, folks, keep in mind, this is a trained federal agent firing his gun in a narrow hallway in the direction of two civilians to try and take down a guy who is not actually doing anything physically threatening. He is merely trying to escape. Now, again, granted, if the ghost escapes, this is extremely bad. But Bill has just endangered the lives of two more innocent people for no good reason. Anyway, it turns out, of course, that the ghost uses mind control powers to change clothes with the bellhop and uses that to escape. And when the bellhop jumps off the roof, Bill, who is wounded in all of this, is touched by the ghost, who plants some mind control on him. And his mind control suggestion is to go and kill the alphas, who are, as we have learned previously, have previously all but shut down Red Flag. So here it is, Red Flag deciding, okay, if we're going to be back in business, we need to shut down the people who put us out of business before. And I have to give the ghost credit. This is an extremely well done strategy. It really is. I was genuinely surprised several times by what he was planning, and he certainly does come incredibly close to pulling it off. So this all ends up with Bill falling under the ghost's sway and heading off to kill Dawn. Now, for some completely bizarre reason, when this kicks in on Bill, he does everything in his efforts to try and kill Dawn very, very slowly. Now, the bellhop was able to run and jump and all this other stuff, and so was Cameron. So there is no indication that that being controlled by the ghost impairs your physical abilities in any way, shape, or form. Now, granted, Bill was somewhat wounded in his in the events of the hotel, but his wound is nothing that would prevent him from walking quickly or from firing a gun quickly. But no, the entire time he's chasing down Bill to try and kill him. I'm sorry, the entire time he's chasing. Wait, Bill. Okay, I'm just going to refer to him as Rosen from now on because I have completely and utterly screwed up that once again, continuing my truly phenomenal track record of being terrible with names. So, Bill, during his whole time trying to kill Rosen, for no reason, moves very, very slowly. And of course, the only reason for this is so that they can have enough time to set things up so they can take Bill down without hurting him, which Nina and Rosen do manage to do. So anyway, overall, oh yeah, and during all of this, at the very end, Cameron manages to shoot and kill the ghost, but not before the ghost, gives him some psychobabble about his psychological problems. And of course, Cameron, being the new guy here, manages to overcome that and thus earning himself a place on the team. Now, okay, that's a very cliche kind of the new guy on the team as a way to drop lots and lots of exposition about how all of this works. It's not a new thing. It's something we've seen in a lot of things. They do it with Agent Scully on the first episode of the X-Files, which is something I will actually be reviewing later on. That was another request that I got. You even see that in anime with Lina Yamazaki in the first episodes of the Bubblegum Crisis Tokyo 2040 show. So, again, I don't really mind that. Here it actually works extremely well. But, like I said, it is a little bit of a cliche. But, cliches are generally only bad if they're badly written cliches. Here, we do see things we have seen more than once before. This show doesn't really reinvent the wheel in any way, shape, or form, but everything that we do see is well written, well acted, and overall, this is an extremely enjoyable show. It's definitely a show I'd be willing to watch again later. Now, am I going to be doing any more alpha reviews in the future? Maybe. I haven't decided yet. I'd have to watch a few more episodes to really decide how I feel, and if I do, it'll probably just be a Season 1 overall review. But no promises on that. Anyway, overall, based on just what I've seen here in the pilot, I'd say Alphas is a pretty solid show, and I would certainly be willing to watch more of it. Anyway, that's it for this episode. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. You can, of course, follow me on Twitter as Hoosier Jedi. And until next time, take care and have a good one.